Welcome to part 1 of our series. I'm going to analyze some of the presets shipped with Bazille. Today's batch is 3 AM Warmwood, one of the leads. I switch multi-core on and HQ off to avoid underruns and to get a nice sound with my screen recording software. Let's listen to the preset first before we go into the details. Okay, I want to follow the audio routing now, only the audio, so I'm going to remove all modulations. To find out how the audio signal flows through the synth, I start at the end, at the output, and work myself backwards through the VST to be sure I'm really following the audio, and not a modulation path starting at one of the oscillators. Obviously, there are two audio paths to follow. Let's start with the one ending at output 1. The audio comes from filter 1, working as a bandpass filter. The cutoff is modulated by LFO1, so I remove the modulation. I'm going to remove all modulations now to get the clean, unmodulated audio before I analyze the modulations in later steps. The filter's input comes from oscillator 1. The wave generated by oscillator 1 is pulse modulated by oscillator 2. I remove the modulation again. The first audio path reads oscillator 1 to filter 1 to output 1. The second audio output is fed by the output of filter 2. I will talk about the settings of each module later. Now it's only about the way of the signals. Again, there is a modulation going on. I remove it. The filter's input comes from oscillator 3, which is also pulse modulated. Again, I remove the modulation. There are some dead cables left leading nowhere now, or better expressed, leading to disconnected modules. I remove them to clear up the picture. Envelope 2 modulating oscillators 2 and 4, which are disconnected. The second audio path reads oscillator 2 to filter 2 to output 2. Let me analyze the involved modules. Path 1 at first. So I turn down the volume of output 2. I bypass the filter to get the clean oscillator's signal. The phase distortion knob is turned up halfway between sine and saw. There will be more about the phase distortion of Bazille in later videos, and there may be even a detailed explanation of phase distortion in general and the phase distortion functionality of Bazille in particular on my channel VSTs in depth, but here it shall be sufficient to say that the two small selectors under the PD knob offer alternating phase functions. For example, saw and square. And the lower selector sets the waveform before phase distortion, before phase distortion, for example, cosine or mapping generator 1 or 2. Let's listen to the sequence again and reapply the filter. It's a 6 dB per octave bandpass filter. Key follow is fully activated to sustain the filter characteristic over the whole range of notes from bass to treble. Let me play the single note C again to compare the spectrum with and without the filter. I freeze the spectrum without the filter. The cutoff frequency is at 16 from 150 units. The range of possible cutoff adjustments is 150 semitones, what is 12.5 octave. Adjusting the cutoff at 16 units means emphasizing the lower part of the spectrum, the lower partials around the second harmonic, and damping the higher frequencies as well as the very low basses. The filter's resonance emphasizes the cutoff frequency only slightly, as it is adjusted to 9% only. And at least output 1 is completely turned to the left stereo channel. The settings of the second audio path are the same as those we have discussed now. There is one optical and only optical difference. The cutoff frequency of filter 2 is set to 0 with the offset function activated. This means the filter's cutoff frequency is the same as the cutoff frequency of filter 1. The knob under the offset selector is set to middle position, what is 0 offset against filter 1. And the modulation of filter 1's cutoff will automatically be applied to filter 2's cutoff as well. Output 2 is completely turned to the right stereo channel, which is the only difference to the audio path discussed first. Let me talk about the modulations in the patch. The filter cutoffs are modulated by LFOs. LFO1 modulates the cutoff of filter 1 and LFO2 is connected with filter 2. Both LFOs differ in the LFO rate, with LFO1 running faster than LFO2. Both LFOs are synchronized to the host, LFO1 to a quarter of a beat and LFO2 to a whole bar. The wave selector is in middle position so that the LFO produces a triangle wave. Because filter 2 is modulated by LFO1 as well, we met the offset function of filter 2 already, we get a kind of double wah-wah effect. But right now there is no modulation at all. The attenuation of the LFO's outputs are at 100%. There is no signal coming from the LFOs. Let me turn the attenuation down to 0. With a modulation wheel or any other attached MIDI controller, we can play the amp mod knob and therefore the attenuation of the LFOs live. The delay knobs are at 36%, what leaves the shorter notes without any modulation when they are shorter than the delay time the LFO needs to start sending signals. With every keystroke, every note on command, the delay time starts anew. At certain relations of delay and note length, we get the sound of, let me say, plucked strings as the filter closes completely down to a cutoff frequency of 0. To avoid this, I can switch the LFO to positive only, meaning the lowest cutoff frequency is that adjusted at the filter's cutoff knob, and the LFO modulates it only upwards. The oscillators 1 and 3, let me say the very original sources of sound in this spec, are modulated as well. Oscillator 1 is modulated by the output of oscillator 2 and oscillator 3 is modulated by the output of oscillator 4. I'm going to talk only about the chain oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, and as it is identical with the routing oscillator 3 and oscillator 4, so I even dim output 2. It is phase modulation with PM course chosen as modulation mode to get maximum modulation depth. The knob regulating the influence of the modulator, here of oscillator 2, is set to plus 34 units, what is about a third up right. The modulating oscillator 2 is detuned against oscillator 1 by plus 12 half tones, what is 1 octave up. And additionally, oscillator 2 is slightly detuned against a clean note with the modify knob at plus 4. Or 5, sorry, plus 5. The mode is beats, meaning it is synchronized to the host. I'll come back to that matter later, but right now we can't notice any modulation because the output of oscillator 2 is 0. The output volume of the modulating oscillator 2 is modulated itself. It is modulated by envelope 2 with the widest range of velocity response. Let me add the oscillators 2 and 4 as well. The patch is complete now, but there are some details left, details worth to look at. First, the modify function in beat mode to detune an oscillator. I take a simple patch to demonstrate. The beat mode synchronizes the modification of the oscillator's pitch to the BPM rate of the host. The higher the BPM rate of the host, the more the oscillator gets detuned at certain modify adjustments. Second, why isn't oscillator 2 detuned against oscillator 1 by exactly 1 octave, but by 1 octave plus a little bit by the modify parameter? Answer: to bring an additional heterodyne beat into the constant sound. Third, the function of the rate mod knob in the envelopes. In simple words, rate mod changes the time the envelope needs to proceed through all of its stages. When I set rate mod to key follow and turn the knob to the right, positive values, the envelope needs longer with higher notes. When I turn it to the left all time-based stages of the envelope are shorter. Fourth, some details on the tweak page. Drift and soft attack are switched off. Drift would cause slightly detuned oscillators, and soft attack would soften the very first milliseconds of each envelope, which would take away a bit of the punch of the envelopes. The snappy function of both envelopes 1 and 2 is switched on, which makes the decay and attack faster at the beginning but slowing down afterwards. The development of both stages is more exponential, so let me demonstrate it with a simple patch. Well, that's pretty much all about this patch. At the beginning I destructed the sound from the outputs backwards. Let me now, at the end of this video, build it up from the oscillators forward.